happy to be here, and I'm very happy for that all of our panelists are here. So thank you for taking the time.
Hi, everybody. My name is Daniela Adames. I'm a human rights specialist for the New York City Commission on Human Rights. I work out of the Staten Island office. At the moment, we're working from home, as you can see, but we're still at it. And I am also joined by my colleague, Kalemaye Huayele.
Thank you, Daniela. This is Ademayu Ayala. I'm co-worker of Daniela, as she mentioned. So we work from home, you see it. And I have been for quite a while with the commission, and this is a very new law and new experience. And they're very happy to impart that to the group.
And I am Sam Irvin. I currently work as a people HR generalist with 8 years of experience. Now currently in consumer goods, spent a year and a half in print and publishing, and then the bulk of my career, 6 years in production, manufacturing, and the beverage industry. So I know just in terms of my background, again, I serve as a generalist. So do a lot of benefits and employee relations and, you know, compliance, and ultimately my background in employee relations and compliance is definitely, I think, useful for the purposes of this meeting.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you all for being here and taking the time. I think this is going to be very beneficial for our youth to hear and get their questions answered. I do want to just drop a little disclaimer. This event is not to promote the use of marijuana. It is intended to bring awareness and educate everyone on the rights and society of where we're going. As well, just want to highly note for all the youth that will be watching that scientific data does show there is negative impacts for youth that's 18 and below using marijuana because they still have developing brains, and is not recommended for use. So we would begin, and we have Cassandra and Lori here, which is good. We'll begin with a little myth busters. So we're gonna gauge everyone's knowledge on marijuana right now. So I'll provide you with the statement, and then you can let me know if you think that's true or false. This will be open to everyone. If you do know the answers, probably let someone who doesn't know go first. So marijuana can be legally sold in all 50 states.
Marijuana can only be sold in 15 states once they add New York.
Thank you. So it was false. No. Marijuana is medicine.
I guess I'll chime in that regard. I do think that it's not if you get it from your local street vendor, but if you get it from a dispensary and it's prescribed, you can use it for medicinal purposes. But I think that's some different strain of marijuana or cannabis, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And then so by definition, by the FDA's definition, is not approved as a medicine, but it can be used to help increase appetite, reduce pain and nausea, and alleviate other symptoms for people who have chronic illnesses. And that is that medical marijuana when you are getting prescribed. I just want to highlight what Sam said as well. That is from a dispensary who is licensed to sell marijuana with the valid prescription from your doctor. THC and CBD are the same thing.
I don't think so. And this is a disclaimer. This is my own personal opinion, not the commission's. And I don't know much about it, honestly, but I don't think they're a form of cannabis, but they're not the same, as far as I know.
Yep. I think Cassandra's also saying, no, I see you there. Yes, you guys are correct. No, they are not. They are not the same thing. It is a part of the cannabis, 2 different strains. That is important. I can drop a link for anyone who is interested in understanding the differences going further. Marijuana is not addictive. Okay, and Sam, she's right there. No. Cassandra's actually right there. Sorry, I mixed it up on my screen. Marijuana can be addictive. So and anyone wants to explain their thought process on it, or I guess the no with the negative kind of threw me off. So you're saying no, marijuana is not addictive.
Oh, for me, I'm saying yes, marijuana is addictive. I think that THC thing is what makes it ultimately addictive, if I read properly somewhere. But yeah, I'd say it is.
Like Cassandra, you said no. Was that no, marijuana is not addictive? You're agreeing?
Yeah, I was agreeing. I think I read it somewhere that it's like not supposed to be.
And I did do a little research. I can get some definitions with support. Again, those links can all be dropped. That marijuana is addictive. The main ingredient is the THC, and it stimulates the brain cells to release this chemical dopamine, which creates that feeling of pleasure. That effect is responsible for that high that you get after smoking. And it is one of the reasons why people use marijuana, which can lead to addiction. This statistic shows that 1 in 11 adults who use marijuana become addicted. And the younger someone starts smoking, the higher the risk of that addiction. There is the idea that people say you cannot be addicted to marijuana and that it's a choice. And that is, I think, Cassandra, when you said you heard it, what is promoted more so in society, especially with younger youth. But it still has the same effects on the brain as other drugs that can be addicting. And it's also important to highlight that many youth use marijuana as a social drug, or it might just be like, oh, I'm hanging out with my friends and we're smoking. But there are some people that also use marijuana for coping mechanisms, which might be if they're feeling sad, or if they have anger problems, or if they're going through a lot of stress or overwhelming events in their life. And when used to cope or to get through things, it can become more addicting or has the possibility of creating an addiction for someone. So marijuana use can negatively affect your performance in school and athletics.
Oh, I would say definitely. And work, school, athletics, work, definitely.
So we're all in agreement on that one. And so I'll just drop the facts. It affects the part of the brain called the hippocampus, and it's critical. That part of the brain is critical for processing and storing new information, which is why it makes it difficult to learn. It also affects your attention, and it impairs your ability to do complex tasks that require you to focus and concentrate. And sometimes the effects can have long term. So like in this very exact moment, it may not have an effect on your concentration, but in the long term, it could affect your memory or your concentration, your ability to focus in school. And for sports, it affects the part of the brain that controls your timing, movement, and coordination. It diminishes your athletic performance, and it also puts you at risk for injury. And it can lead to problems regarding the lungs. So chronic marijuana users develop cough and bronchitis because of the toxic mix of gases and particles in the marijuana smoke. And these are just like data facts, not maybe every single person, but around like overall the impact it can have on your body. Driving under the influence of marijuana is dangerous.
It's
Okay.
obvious.
That was a trick question.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with those things, but it's obvious. Under the influence of marijuana, alcohol, anything, risky to yourself and to the public. The critical term is under the influence. It's not under your influence. It's under the influence. Very risky.
Yes, and that's important to highlight. I know everyone, or what I hear in the community with youth is the drinking and driving is bad, but also that smoking marijuana is just as dangerous. It affects the alertness, your concentration, your coordination, your judgment, and your reaction time, which are very important in driving. So we can begin we're going to begin the panel from Daniela. That's the Commission of Human Rights doing the marijuana and employment.
Thank you, Rashida. So I am going to be sharing my screen really quickly. Just bear with me for a second. All All right, so in the meantime, as I said before, my name is Daniela Dames. I work with the New York City Commission on Human Rights alongside Almaya Huayele, who is here with us today, and he will pitch in whenever I miss any kind of information. So hold on, let me just share screen. There we go. All right, so before we get started with, introducing essentially the new rules with marijuana testing and employment, I do want to let you know that this presentation is designed just to give you an overview of what that is. It is not an exhaustive presentation in regards to the Commission on Human Rights, the law itself, or what it covers. Each individual, this is a complaint-driven entity, which means that you need to come to the Commission with a complaint in order to start a form of investigation. So each case, it's individual. So we are going to look very quickly at the overview of the Commission on Human Rights, protections against discrimination in employment, very brief, because that's very important. And then we'll get, of course, into marijuana testing and employment, and then how to contact the Commission and the process. So just, as an overview, the Commission on Human Rights enforces the city human rights law, which is the anti-discriminatory law in New York City. And of course, educates the public on their rights and responsibilities under the law. And let me know if I'm going a little too fast. I tend to speak really fast. So the Commission is composed of 4 offices. So the Community Relations Bureau, which is where Ayala and I work out of, our law enforcement, Office of Mediation and Conflict Resolution, and of course, the Office of the Chair. Now, within the Community Relations, Ayala and I, we do these kinds of presentations and talk about the law so that people are aware of their protections and also their obligations under the law. Our LEB or law enforcement, they carry out complaints, they do investigations, they file cases, they initiate cases, and they bring cases before the City Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings and conciliate settlement. The Office of Mediation and Conflict Resolution, as its name described, is to come to resolution through mediation in the event that people don't want to go all the way through with filing a complaint or with filing a lawsuit. And then the Office of the Chair issues final decisions when it comes to rules and regulations. They draft policy, much like the one we are going to look at today, and engages policy discussion with Commission stakeholders. So there are offices throughout the 5 boroughs. Our central office is in Lower Manhattan, and you can always contact us by calling 311, or I will give you our info line number at the end of the presentation, so it's a little more direct. Now, in order to establish discrimination, again, the law prohibits discrimination in several areas, right? So employment, which we'll focus on today, but also important to note, public accommodations, housing, discriminatory harassment, and bias-based profiling by law enforcement. Today, we're going to talk about employment. And it's important to note that in order to bring a case with the Commission, the incident must have occurred within 1 year. So if something were to happen today, March 26th of 2021, you have until March 26th of 2022 in order to bring a complaint to the Commission on Human Rights. The only exception are gender-based harassment cases. And if you want more information about that, I am more than happy to talk about it in a different time. Now, just very simple, discrimination is unfair and unequal treatment of a person or group based on a certain characteristic or membership in a protected class, such as race and color. So that's essentially what we're going to talk about today. And then in order to establish discrimination, for example, in employment, you need to show that discrimination occurred and a certain relationship exists between the people involved in covered by our law. So like employer to employee, tenant to landlord, or customer to public accommodation or public service. So within the protected categories that the Commission on Human Rights has, there are over 26 protected classes. Now, pre-employment and marijuana testing is just one of them, right? So you are also protected against discrimination based on your age, on the color of your skin, the religion that you practice, whether you're a person who has a disability or not, your gender identity, salary history. And these are things that, this is a living document, I like to say, right? So they grow depending on the need of what's out there. So for example, the pre-employment marijuana testing just passed last year. And this list we hope to continue to be growing. And we have an extended presentation when it comes to every single one of these protected categories. So if you have questions about this, I will put my email and Ayeles as well. So you can always shoot us an email if you have more questions in regards to this. Now, who is protected under the law? So it's not just about, the protected categories, but they have to meet certain parameters, right? So the person must work in New York City because we are a city agency. Now, there has to be 4 or more employees within the entity or the agency that you work for. As I said before, the last incident of discrimination must have occurred within the last year in New York City. And you can always file with New York State Court within 3 years after the last discrimination act. So with us, it's 1 year, but you can still have the right to start an individual can file a case within 3 years in general New York State law. Now, what does it mean to have 4 more employees, right? So that means the employers themselves, independent contractors and freelancers, employer, parents, spouse, or domestic partners, or anybody who is essentially working in that space. And now employees do not all need to be working within New York City, right? So if you have an establishment here, you own an establishment here, and then you also own something in Jersey or around the tri-state area, that also counts towards the 4 more employees rule, essentially. And then who is protected, right? So interns, undocumented workers, part-time and probationary workers, domestic workers, independent contractors, and freelancers. So whoever is involved within this employment process, it doesn't matter whether you're paid or unpaid, you're still covered under the law. And then the second important part about protections in employment is that it encompasses every single aspect of the employment process, right? So not just while you're employed at this entity, but also the hiring process, the firing process, and also the pay, right? And we'll talk about that in 1 second. So the hiring process, just as we're going to talk about today with marijuana testing, you're protected from people who want to hire a specific group of people, or just questions about a membership in a protected group, and of course the firing. You cannot be fired from being a member of a protected group. And then in pay and other terms, just such as promotions or assignments or scheduling, you cannot be paid differently than other workers because you're a member of a protected group. So for example, workers of one immigrant status are paid less than workers with a different immigration status. That it's against the law and it is not allowed. Everybody should be paid the same wage across the board, depending on the minimum wage laws or however the employment or the employer sets out those rules. So as I said, it's very individual based. But the bottom line is that everybody has to be equal under the law. All right, so now we're going to talk about marijuana testing and employment. As I said before, this is essentially brand new. So as of May 10th of 2020, employers are no longer permitted to test job candidates for marijuana or tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC for short, as a condition of employment, right? And we'll talk about what that means in a second. There are, of course, exceptions which allow employers to require tests for candidates applying for very specific jobs, and there's a specific list which we'll go through. And then employers are still able to test current employees for drug use, right? So the key point here is that it is not a condition of employment. Now, we had seen that marijuana was used in order to deny people jobs, right? Whether they knew or not that you were a user of marijuana, right? Like it didn't matter. And it was very much tied to race and minority groups, and also to location and age. So if a person were to go apply for a job and the employer would suspect or would judge or prejudge that this person would probably be a marijuana user, that would be enough to deny someone employment, right? And then they would go on and be like, well, we need to test you before we offer you this job. So that is against the law, right? That has been passed, that the use of marijuana or THC cannot be used as a condition of employment. They cannot deny you employment based on those facts, right? And very similar to our Fair Chance Act, a person needs to be offered a job prior to investigating any kind of criminal background or to allow any kind of drug testing if it's required for that particular position. So then that leads us to
Daniela, you cannot put also in the advertisement, job advertisement, you cannot put that in advertising for the appropriate job vacancies. Okay, go ahead, Daniela.
Yes, exactly. So again, this takes us to discussing exactly what kind of specific jobs do still have to test, right? And like I said, those are quite limited. So for example, if you're applying for a job within the Department of Transportation, right? Or if you are required by federal state law to pursue a safety or security or a collective bargaining agreement, including terms selected to pre-employment during a test job applicants, right? So these are very specific jobs and very signalizing like why are they requiring you to test before actual being employed, right? So for example, positions that fall into these categories like police officers or peace officers, law enforcement or investigative positions within the Department of Investigations, positions with NYC buildings or New York labor laws, which like in relation to workers at public work sites, right? Or positions requiring a commercial driver's license, or positions supervising or caring for children, positions supervising medical patients, or positions supervising vulnerable people. Now, again, positions that work under like active construction sites that operate heavy machinery, positions that regulate work or near power, gas, or lines, again, that drive any kind of vehicle through most of the shifts, or that have any kind of use with fuel or aircraft, or provide information regarding aircraft weight, or any type of use in the airport and stuff like that, and positions where a drug impairment would pose an immediate risk of death or serious physical harm to the employee or the other people. So this reminds me of the question of the true or false that Rashida talked about at the beginning, which is, why does it affect the way that you work? Well, yes, of course it does. It alters the way that you react to certain things. And much like the question about whether this is considered like medication or not, even if you were to use some kind of medication prescribed by a doctor that says, do not use this if you're about to drive or have any kind of heavy machinery, it is the same concept. If you're going to be doing any kind of job that requires you to have your full attention, as far as like these types of jobs, then these jobs are still allowed to test. But whatever is not included in these jobs, then that should not be, again, a condition of employment. And then for claims that have been between May 10 of 2020 and July 24th of 2020, the commission will not be filing enforcement actions related to the above listed positions. So that just means that there's a bit of a time between employers to get used to this new law, as far as like not requiring testing, right? And again, if you believe that you have been asked to undergo any kind of testing for marijuana or THC in violation of this law, we can help you, right? Just call us and have a conversation with us, and we'll look at your case to see if you potentially could file a complaint with us. And at this point, I'll leave it open to Ayele if there's anything else that you would like to add or any questions.
No, you can take down our 311, better our 212-416-0197. Very useful, so that in case of situation, as Daniela well put it, we cannot do anything. But maybe the commission will call the employer and tell about the law and get the employment for the person. So that's what it is. That is our number. Thank you, Daniela.
Of course. And just, really quickly, this doesn't mean again that a person can bring any kind of drug or be under the influence of marijuana or THC while at work, right? Like this is not what this rule or this new law is essentially letting people to do. It's just the fact that you cannot be tested for a job, but other things still very much apply. And at this point, I'm open to any questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Daniela. Before we officially start our panel portion, I want to know if give the chance to anyone in our audience, Cassandra or Lori, if you have any questions you'd like to ask the panelists, feel free to use your mic or put it in the chat. And if not, then.
To add something to what Daniela described, this law is closer to past conviction record. They lump more or less. So if you have had that training in the past under the commission, it's the same thing. You can't advertise saying that the qualification you could not take any marijuana. And another thing too, you can also test people while working. If you feel that, some people are taking marijuana at the workplace, you can also do the test, but it's more of interactive thing. You don't have to deny somebody because of assumption that somebody probably, like Daniel will put it, a certain group of the society, some people assume, you take our marijuana because the way you dress, the way you look like. So that's why disproportionately, a lot of people, black and brown, have been affected by this law. So this is why we have it in the city. The same thing with conviction record.
Wonderful, thank you. I do know we've also had Alex Korkov from the commission. Would you like to introduce yourselves and say a few words?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry for being late. I was on the other meeting. Alex Korkov, Human Rights Commission, Staten Island office. Glad to see everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to take in this important information. And again, the idea behind panels like this to empower young people and everybody about the existence of the human rights law. It's, as Daniela said, the most expensive, most comprehensive law in the nation, broader than federal law. Thank you so much for being
here. And because, as Alex said, because the law is new, and both the public and employers are not exposed to it. So whenever a situation like that, you can call the commission for further explanation. I don't know very much if they have cases on that now at this time, but anytime you can call us for further information, explanation, because it can happen. People can lose their job tomorrow or next week. So you can say, well, the commission informed us about this. How shall we go about it? So you can call Alex, the director of the Staten Island office, Daniela, and we have left our telephone number there. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. And again, thank you, Alex, for joining us. Again, thank you to Daniela for the presentation. Thank you for Yellow. Thank you to Sam. Those are all of our panelists, just to give everyone a chance to see you again. We're going to start.
I want to mention something too. Because, there is voters registration. I don't know if your clients are out of the age of voters now, of that age. So we bring that to the attention so that people to register for that. Thank you.
Awesome, great. Thank you for adding that great point. I kind of want to have we have a few questions, both some in regards to during the interview or job search process in relation to marijuana use by potential employees, and then also a few questions in regards to employees and once they're actually hired in the workplace in regards to marijuana use. So I know you kind of already answered this first question, and Daniela, in your presentation, if people still need to pass the drug test as a part of the interview process, but I wanted to sort of follow that up with where could someone who wants to know, which I know you mentioned there are a few jobs that still require drug tests as part of the application process. So where could someone find the resources for that if they're interested in looking for jobs, so they know which jobs would require additional testing?
Sure. So I am going to put a link on the chat that has kind of like a working list of all the different regulations as far as like DOT and who essentially can continue to test under this new law.
Great, thank you. And I also want to, oh, Alex, you have something you'd like to
Yeah,
add?
and you can always check Commission's website. There should be guidance on our website as to which enumerates every exception. If you just Google New York City human rights, you should be able to get there. It's a very comprehensive site with lots of information.
Awesome, thank you. I kind of want to frame this question also to you, Sam. As someone who is in human resources, I know human resources department is one that often is involved in the application process. So as someone who works in the human resources office for someone who is applying to a job, who can they reach out to, or how can they contact their human resources office, or what suggestions do you have for someone contacting the office and asking in regards to drug testing?
So ultimately, I do know that, any like when we are like recruiting and interviewing in postings, we do signify, we don't have to check the box where have you had a criminal record or anything like that, but we do signify certain roles or contingent upon drug testing or if applicable. But I would say if a person like is looking for a job and they're wondering if the organization tests, they should definitely contact on most job sites like our site. We do have human resources at or careers at, and you can reach out to those email addresses, but it's not like a specific person you would reach out to and say like, hey, are you doing any drug testing in any shape or form? Like, I don't, for each organization it could be different. I just know for the organizations I've worked at over the last 8 years, we haven't had anyone designated to fielding those sorts of questions.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, I just wanted to see from in your experience in your field of work, what your suggestions would be on that. So thank you for sharing. Also, like moving on and really on like sort of the same topic, what happens, what are the next steps if a drug test does come back positive?
So Daniela probably can attest to this too, but I know like ultimately, it is similar to like the criminal background check. If the job ultimately, let's just say I'm a surgeon and I'm operating on someone or doing something that has, I and my drug test came back as having all sorts of stuff in it, I can be denied the job on a basis that that positive drug test has implications to like the public or harm or something to somebody else. But let's just say I'm still that same surgeon and I had, a background check and ultimately it came back as having no drugs on there, but I had like petty theft or something. Does the petty theft have anything to do with me doing a good job as a surgeon? Absolutely not. So they shouldn't be denying you a job on that basis. And the employer, if they have to give you notice, they can't just tell you you're not going to get the job or anything like that. There's certain paperwork and stuff that they have to give you and inform you of your rights, where you can then escalate to the Human Rights Commission, and people have, but they have to inform you. They can't just say you're not getting the job.
Couldn't have said it better myself, that it's a matter of having the right documentation, just like with as Sam said, if something comes back like in your criminal record or something like that, they're process, right? It's a process that the employer has to do, documentations, and that they have to tell you the reason why and thoroughly explain it, and also how it correlates with the job that you're applying for.
I just wanted to add, it's always a great idea anytime you get a job to get employee handbook and to find out what the policies of that specific workplace are. And then, because sometimes, the human factor comes in and somebody might be overstepping their authority in denying your job based on something. But if you know the policies of that place, then you can act accordingly, in addition to whatever protections you have under the laws. So always a great idea. You get a job, ask for the employee handbook or whatever personnel policies that place has.
Awesome, great, thank you. Yeah, that's a really helpful point. I'll make sure to note that. As I want to sort of keep on sort of this topic in regards to actual job interviews, so what are your recommendation suggestions? Whether or not someone should be upfront, well, I should say potential employers, should they be upfront and inform their potential employers during the interview that they do smoke marijuana, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, if I could chime in, I wouldn't necessarily, advise somebody to upfront go and say, hey, I smoke marijuana, or I drink, or I smoke weed. I wouldn't advise anyone to do that. If you're interviewing for the job, it's the job itself and not what you do in your spare time. And immediately, I would ultimately think that sets a tone or a precedence for somebody to judge you or find a reason that they'll mask as to why you weren't qualified for the job.
It also has to do with the reason why you're disclosing this kind of information. What is the reason behind you needing to disclose that? Now, it's important to notice that New York State is on the verge of voting a bill which would legalize cannabis products for adults, right? So now this allows for residents to maintain a little bit number of plants in their homes, or to use, or whatever it is, just as you would do with cigarettes or with alcohol, right? Now this bill could be up for vote early next week, but the important point here is that as cannabis and marijuana become less legalized, right, or as it becomes legalized, what is the need for you to share this kind of information, right? I'm not going to share with the current employer that what I did during the weekend, if it does not entail any kind of information that would help me achieve to get this job. So just ask yourself why you would disclose that information and what purpose does it serve.
Great, thank you. Those are both very good points. I don't know if Alex or Fayella, you want to add anything?
I just want to add that, in job interview, you're basically, you're playing a game, quote unquote, right? You're trying to get the job. There are certain rules by which you play that game, and disclosing additional information about yourself to the employer, it can come back to haunt you in ways that cannot be predicted. So stick to the merits of the job, discuss your qualifications, and, wait until you see what kind of work environment it is. Maybe it's a place where people really like people who use marijuana, and, it's a very liberal environment, but maybe you're dealing with somebody who thinks it's a step up to the, drug addiction or something, or some retrograde, stuff like that. So, have to be very careful because you don't know the person you're interviewing. So again, stick to qualifications, to whatever's on that resume, and discuss your qualifications for the job. No personal information during the interview if you can help. Unless somebody really probes and it's something benign, but I would not discuss any kind of drug or alcohol use at the interview process.
And like Alex and Daniela, you hear me? Put it very well put it. The intention of the drafters of the law is to prevent the assumption. Employers also know, they will know the law. The assumption that black and brown people, when they see you, they take marijuana. And sometimes they test you, and then they might find out. So they just want to prevent this kind of life conviction record. It's a no-no thing. Don't have to tell, and they don't have to see. And as Alex put it, your merit is the most important thing that. But somehow they happen to find out. and they refuse to hire you because of that, except those exceptional places where NYPD and all others, where the law put explicitly as an exception, then you have a case, because this is an assumption, I presume that they have toward this group of communities. So that is the intention.
Additionally, I just want to add something that Alex pointed out, which is if during the interview process, the interview is probing you to answer or to ask any kind of questions. It doesn't have to be solely like a marijuana, but just other types of questions that for you does not really, you know, have anything to do with the job that you're applying for, right? They could ask about, we have seen cases where they ask about like when, for example, in ageism, right? Like when you graduated, as if that, you know, like things like that, like, you know, like if you think like that's an issue, or if you have any children, if you're married, if you have partners, like why are they asking those questions? So always be very critical when answering the questions, when you listen to all these questions, like why are they asking you? What is the reason behind it? And if you feel that that has nothing to do with the job that you're applying, then you're in all your right to question that. You know, it can be like, why is this information needed for the purpose of me attaining this job?
And salary too, for that matter. They cannot ask your previous salary. They have to pay you for the job advertised and for the qualification you have. So this is to prevent the assumption toward this certain group of people in terms of salary, in terms of past history, criminal or otherwise. And the law explicitly puts that was the intention of the drafters of the law, to prevent people of black and brown not to get a job because of the assumption of the employer. And I hope the employers will know this. So although it's a no, there is a problem until it's being familiarized by the public and employers. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. I never knew that employers aren't allowed to ask your previous salary. It's very interesting. I'll definitely take that to note for my next interviews, whenever that will be. Who knows? But I kind of want to go back to what like Alex you noted on like kind of like finding out whether or not like the company culture, like your coworkers are ones that may be more accepting about marijuana use or maybe less accepting. What are your suggestions on how you can actually sort of gauge that?
You know, we've had people who applied for work in, you know, that magazine High Times, right? I mean, this is a magazine that specifically covers issues related to marijuana use. So you can imagine the culture is focused on this. But if you're walking someplace where you're walking in, you're new, you know, and take a couple of weeks to see, you know, what the place is like. You know, what are the people talking about? You know, what is the culture during the lunch hour? Is anybody sharing anything? I mean, these are just, you know, like survival tips. You know, and we're starting out, right? We come to a work environment. We tend to share a lot with people around us. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's all trial by error. But you know, when you come in, like no humor, that might be risque. You know, I mean, you're focusing on getting that paycheck. You don't know how it affects a person who's sitting next to you. So again, maybe for the first couple of weeks, you know, just maintain friendly, cordial relationship, but see what's going on around you, you know, before volunteering any information. Like what are people talking about? What are their interests? Are people communicating at all? Maybe it's a very strict, you know, congested corporate environment where everybody's afraid of each other. Maybe it's super friendly. Maybe people are visiting each other's homes. It all depends on, you know, what the place is like, what the institutional culture is like. That would be my suggestion. Listen, don't speak that much in the beginning, you know, wait before you have a chance to open up to somebody, see what the whole place is like. I'm sorry if it sounds a little dark, but that's, you know, that's how sometimes, you know, you have to, what you have to do to survive in the workplace.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your honesty for 100%. Hello, do you have anything, or Daniela, would you like to add anything?
Sure, and I think more technical. I mean, if you are a person who is applying for the jobs that are already testing for marijuana or that are constantly doing, drug tests on a random basis. Just be smart about the fact that don't share that kind of information if you're a person who uses marijuana for recreational purposes, right? Like if they're not for recreational purposes, then you would have a note and you will have something to prove, just as if you were taking any kind of like drug medication, like pain medication that comes up in a drug test. So again, if you're applying for a job and if you're worried about the culture, just take in mind that these jobs that are on the list that continue to test, like just don't talk about it, right? Like it's not needed. It's part of, as Alex said, the employee manual and book. Now if it's a job that doesn't necessarily fall within those guidelines, keep it to yourself. I mean, it's the law itself protects you for getting employment, but once you're employed, that's a whole different ballgame, right? Like it's different. People can still, if you go to work drunk or if you go to work, under the influence, that's very different than what we're talking about, which is how to get employment, right? Like that's a different aspect of any use or recreational use of any kind of substance. If you're going out to work under the influence of anything, then that's merit for some kind of suspension or whatever the laws are, right? So just be smart about the jobs that you're applying as far as like what information you give. And if you already know that this is part of just the policy itself, then just keep it to yourself. There's no need to, overshare.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Sam. I wonder if you have anything you'd like to add based specifically on your background experience.
Yeah, I'll copy Daniela and Alex ultimately. And one of the things also, I think, as we, continue to hear the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion, is something that's not often talked about or spoken about, is sometimes the names that are used on resumes. If somebody's name sounds ethnic, um there's that silent discrimination behind that. Of course, you can ultimately pick up and change your name, and why would you pick up and change your name for the sake of a job? So there's that. There's all sorts of things that come into the mix when you're talking about getting in the company, and then once you are in the company, there's the misgendering sometimes. So there's a lot. And if I had to sum everything up, like Alex and Daniela said, you applied for a role based on, the specs of the job. Do you have the qualifications in terms of education? Do you have the qualifications in terms of experience, or what it is that you're looking for? And if you do have those qualifications, ultimately go ahead and apply for that job. Going through the interview process, it's imperative to ask questions. Never leave the table without asking questions, because Alex said, hey, are you a stuck up company, or are you sort of kind of like loose and fluid? How would you know what the company is like at least a little bit before you even get there? And once you're in the company, again, things change. Your rights ultimately change in terms of, for example, if someone's like, you've been hired and you're quote unquote considered a token, if you will, and it's unbearable to work there. So there's harassment, there's all these different things that create a hostile working environment. If you go by a gender, they, them, their, or she, and they continue to call you something that you are not, that's completely different. So your rights ultimately change. So to sum it up, everybody is human, everyone's a person, everyone has equal rights when you're applying the jobs. Most job specs should have, we're an equal opportunity employer. If they don't have that, that's a flag for yourself, because we are in 2021 and it's something that no one should have to say, but you know, those are small things you can look at when you're going through the recruitment process. Ask questions, and definitely educate yourself on what is acceptable versus what's not acceptable. And if something seems off, if there's smoke, probably there's smoke there. Use the Human Rights Commission, because the employer is not going to tell you we discriminated against you because of your name or because of your gender. And it's your job to ultimately advocate for yourself. Before I close, I will tell you a quick story. One of my previous companies, a candidate came in dressed as a male, presented himself as a male, got the job, went through, and then showed up on the first day, you know, as a female, wanting to be named, you know, referred to as a different name, clothing, everything. And I had a manager say to me, well, that's not who we hired. You know, we have to tell him to go. I said, well, you'll buy yourself a $60 million lawsuit if you did that. So, you know, you just have to really and truly know your rights in a sense. And me as a human resources professional, it was my job to make sure that that candidate, you know, was able to stay within the company, because his gender or changing the gender had nothing to do with you know, him being able or her being able to perform the job. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you for that. And there's something that I noted in all of the responses, which is why it's important. And we're doing this for that summer youth employment, because you get to choose where you want to work. So what they're highlighting is doing research on these options. I know when you get job placement, it isn't like they say, hey, you got 2 weeks to choose. You know, you probably have about a day, but just thinking about, maybe I want to work in corporate America, and you're gonna do your own research before job placement, before you ask for an internship there. Or maybe you want to take the internship there to see if it aligns with, if you are a youth who does smoke marijuana, will I be able to work and thrive well in this work environment? This is when you want to maximize that SYEP opportunity to really test out different work environments and see which one is good for you.
And I just want to mention about the human rights law. The human rights law, the very crucial ingredients are perception and actual. So the human resource person pointed out, it's not that hard. If I perceive my age or my color or something I feel has anything to do with my employment, look, it's perception. The burden is very low. The threshold is very low. So you can contact the commission, and the commission will talk to you, take the thing. Probably if necessary, will take the complaint. But if there is actual, very obvious, say, look, I don't want to hire an old man. Well, that's a very actual one. So the law has this broader interpretation, and the threshold is very low. So if you perceive, look, this person didn't hire me because I'm an old person. Oh yeah, nobody's going to question you. You go to the commission. So I perceive this is the standard. I perceive this is why I didn't get the job. When it happens, it might not happen. So it's very good to know that the commission standard at this time is very low. The threshold is low. So it all depends on your perception. Why you think they don't hire you? Is it because of your race, color, gender, age? So these are very important elements in our law, purposely put, you know, to make you help you, you know, contact us. There is a lawyer. We referred you to them, and they talk to you, and they will prove to you if your perception is right or not. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, both of you. Yeah, thank you, Sam. That was a really, really important story, but I think it really highlights a lot, like what we're trying to get at here. Like Rashida mentioned, I wanted to sort of like give you a chance to like sort of build on that and say like, how can you advocate for yourself in the workplace? And also going a little back with like, what kind of questions can you ask during the interview process that are tasteful but still allow you to get a grasp for the company culture?
Yeah, I think there's a slew of different questions you can ultimately ask. For some resources, if you just Google, company culture questions, SHRM, that's a Society of Human Resources Management. They give you questions. Balanced Careers will give you questions. Forbes will give you questions. So there's a wide array. If I could think of 2 or 3 questions off the top of my head. One, is the general, what's your company culture, but what does that tell you? What's important, to you? You may ask, can you tell me about like how the staff, interacts with each other? No one goes to company happy hours anymore. But in past, when that was a thing, sometimes those things can be, exclusionary. So you may think that, hey, they go out, but I might not get invited to one of those. So what sorts of team building exercises or what sorts of programs do you guys run internally to build the culture? What's acceptable in terms of like work-life balance or work-life harmony? Like, how do people work with each other? Those are acceptable questions, because you can ask, again, what's the culture, but what do you really want to know? Does the company want you to work 80 hours a week? And that's the culture? Because it's certainly the culture in Wall Street, where Goldman Sachs just told the folks, hey, fine, you can finally have a Saturday off after making people work 100 hours a week. If that's what you're looking for, then great. Or are you looking for someplace that's like, okay, we have a hard stop at 35 to 40 hours a week? Or are you looking for some place that is more receptive of family? Because some places they don't want to know how many kids you have, any pets or dogs you have. They just want to come in, do their work. So it really is knowing what you like and asking sort of kind of professional questions around what makes you feel comfortable. I would never work somewhere where they're like, okay, you can finally have a Saturday off. I need Friday afternoon at 4:00, I'm done, and you don't talk to me until Monday morning. So it just depends on what you're looking for.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that was really comprehensive and very, very helpful. Sort of going back to the interview process, this is open to all of our panelists. What are any suggestions that you have for someone during the interview process specifically, in terms of like just knowing their rights ahead of time, being able to communicate and advocate for themselves?
And that question written to is like, would you, because they can't test, but would you tell someone you should stop smoking marijuana if you know you're going for this job because there's a chance they may drug test you? Or is that something we would advise youth to do? Or is that not necessary because they can't test you? So if I get the offer and then they drug test me after and it comes back positive, that's fine, because they can't use that as a reason to not hire me. But would we still suggest for a youth to like not smoke during that time?
For me, I think the best answer here would be is like use your judgment, right? Like if you're going to apply for a job, if you're going on an interview, you definitely want to put your best face forward. There, as Sam put out, as far as like there are many things online that you can look at, about questions about how to dress, about the different things that you can do to best present yourself in a job interview. So we can tell you what to do or what not to do, but you be your own judge of character, right? Like who would you hire? Like if you were to present yourself or somebody were to come to you for an interview, look at yourself in the mirror and see, like, would I hire this person? If the answer is yes, and if that's what it falls down as far as like the job that you're applying, then definitely. Now, to address the question of like knowing your rights and advocating for yourself, just know that these protections are there for a reason, right? Like just as Ayala put it, if for any instance within the interview you feel uncomfortable or you feel that the question is asking something that is outside of the realm of the interview workplace, parameters, that they're asking something personal that does not entail anything to do with the job that you're applying for, then that should be something that should be like a little, sign to you, like, why are they asking these questions? Why do they want to know? And to not be afraid to ask exactly that. Can you please tell me the reason as to why you want to know this information? And be confident. And if you, don't believe that that is something that you cannot answer, you can't answer, it doesn't, fall apart within the interview or the job itself, then just be like, I don't think this, or could you please explain to me why this would matter in the job that I'm doing, right? So, of course, always being professional and being respectful, but then just being curious as to why they want to know certain information, if you feel that that information is not part of the job that you're applying for.
You are not required to answer this thing. Like past conviction record, they don't have to ask you in the application form. If you find in the application form asking you about your criminal record, that is it. You can contact the commission. Look, they have it on the application form. I'm not required this answer. You can file a complaint on its face or based on that. If somebody asks you, do you take marijuana, do you smoke? Not supposed to do. They are not supposed to advertise that requirement on the paper. So the very fact they ask you, you don't have, like supposed, you don't have to go to dialogue arguing. You can say that this will influence the decision to hire me. He asked me this question. Contact the Commission on Human Rights. You don't have to go into arguing with him or her for that matter.
Again, getting to the question whether to use marijuana or not to use marijuana before you go,
Yeah,
I guess it all depends on the kind of job you're applying. I mean, if you're applying for something in law enforcement and that's where you want your career to be, or in using the heavy machinery and you want to do an internship there, then probably maybe not using is a good idea. I mean, we've had people who went for testing and day before they ate, a poppy seed bagel. Everybody knows about it. And then the test comes back as if you used cocaine, I mean, that's one of the effects of poppy seeds. I mean, I would not probably use extensive intake of alcohol if job requires, I mean, again, mandated by law, job requires you to be tested. I mean, some of those just, like common sense things that if you want to get into that field, you might want to do, like not drink for a couple of days, maybe not use cannabis for, I believe it stays, depending on the test, again, might be hair, that's 3 months, and blood, or however company is doing testing. So, I mean, some corporate entities in the past had labs in the lobby, or I don't want to mention the names, but the big corporate entities, they would have actual testing labs in the lobby of their building. I mean, they would send you down and this is where you're going to be tested. So, just find out more about the industry you're going to and see, what steps you need to take.
Great, thank you all so much. I want to shift gears a little bit now to the actual workplace and like what are common workplace policies that pertain to employees who smoke marijuana or use any other forms of recreational drugs.
Could you clarify? Oh, sorry.
So I think it was Alex who said earlier, the employee handbook is a really good resource ultimately, because I think maybe every handbook under the sun, or most handbooks, will, tell you smoking on premises prohibited, or, drug use trading prohibited, or so I would definitely refer to the employee handbook about what their, anti-drug policy looks like or is. I definitely, that would be like my first line of action, is to see what truly, it's outlined in the employee handbook. And let's just say they don't have an anti-drug policy or anything like that, because remember, the list is not just is marijuana. There's like cocaine and dana and all this other stuff that we haven't even like scratched the surface. And what if it's not marijuana and it's something else that shows up, but there's no policy or anything telling you the company's stance on that. And then you do get a random drug test if they do it, and then decide to take, adverse action, but it was never clear to you in the employee handbook, or it was never said to you or told to you in any shape or form.
So would you be protected in that instance?
I would say it depends, on what the situation, obviously, is, how the company's precedent, because sometimes that is also, a thing where the policy isn't clear or it's ambiguous, and they've always done things a certain way. If they've handled, let's just say, drug cases the same way and for the last 5 cases, and in some shape or form, even though you shouldn't know anyone's like personal business, but and then when it came to you, it was different. You may have, some sort of, defense in that regard. Like, is it just me or is it for everybody? Like, what's the rule for all? But I wouldn't call it like blanket protection, because it's so vast and, it's such a big area and arena where I wouldn't say because the company didn't say you can't smoke weed, you ultimately test positive and then just be like, if the job requires you not to be under the influence of anything, then that's a different story. And that probably would have been outlined in some shape of, the UK calls it contract, but your code of conduct in a sense.
It's additionally also just to keep, if this is something that is important to you, to keep in mind what's going on a political level. The more that it becomes legalized across the United States, then what are the parameters? How does that involve? Well, this law changes once, and if ever becomes legalized here in New York City or in New York State, right? Like, I'm sure that we'll see the differences, like in Jersey or in Colorado, like all these places that already have legalized it, and how that turns out as far as like jobs and all the different things that combine. So if this is something that is important to you, just keep in mind what is going on politically.
Great, thank you both so much. As we sort of wind down, since we're almost approaching 5 o'clock, we're about 10 minutes off. I just want to give a chance for all of you to say some final thoughts, suggestions, advice that you would like to share, and hope that everyone who's watching this panel will take away.
And Cassandra, if you have any questions for anyone, if you want to ask for your friends who aren't present, so you could go back and share with them, or anything that came to mind after hearing all the panels speak, please feel free.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, before when we were discussing like the interview process, like they're not supposed to ask you certain questions like, oh, do you like use a certain drug or something? If your response to them is like, oh, like why do you need to know this, and how would it affect like, whether or not you hire me? Do you think that would like maybe make you look bad, like you're answering them yes, sort of?
I guess it really depends on where you're applying, right? And I would look at that as someone who's asserting their rights and know about their protections under the law. But this is my personal opinion. I don't know. I will leave it open to the other panelists to give their input here.
Cassandra, can you just repeat the question?
Yes, so I was asking if like you're in a job interview and your interviewer were to ask you, oh, do you like use marijuana or something like that, right? And you were to respond to them, oh, how does this like influence your decision to like hire me or not? Something along the lines of that. Like, would it make you look bad because it seems like your answer is yes?
Well, I agree with Daniela in that regard. I'm gonna say in all the years that I have been doing this job, I haven't come across, much where in an interview process, an interviewer is asking you like, say, hey, do you smoke weed? But if in the event it does happen and you assert yourself and say, how does this have anything to do, with the role that I'm applying to, it could go both ways. It could be that the interviewer is impressed, like, you know what, that's actually a really good question. Why do I need to know this question, or this person knows their rights or has done their research. Or you can't control what somebody else is going to think. Maybe they may look at it as, you know what, I don't like that you didn't answer this question, or that you may be defiant. So there's no right or wrong answer, because you don't know how someone is going to interpret your response. They can interpret in a positive way, or they can take it, in a negative way. That's what I would ultimately comment on that part, is you don't know how somebody's going to view how you answer.
However, if you do know that the question that they're asking should not be part of the interview process, right? So as we talked about here with marijuana use, or with like salary history or background checks or anything like that, like if you are aware that those are things that you should not be answering in the interview process, and you are asked that and you provide the information saying like, I don't feel comfortable sharing this information, or what is the reason, and you do not get hired for the job, you can call us and we can help you out as far as like doing more investigation as to why it is that you did not attain that job, and if that is the reason why. And if they're asking those sorts of questions, then we need to have a talk with that employer.
I'm actually happy you said that, because when I was listening to Sam, that's the same. It's how can I tell if I didn't get the job because the drug test, or because of this, idea that I was smoking marijuana. But it's all about perception. And I don't know if it was Alex or Ali that said that it's all about someone's perception as well when they're doing it. So it's like, I can say that based off this interaction, I think that you didn't hire me because this is how I answered the question, or because my test came back. But it's like, I feel like it's a little gray area on how do you actually prove it. And so if any of those situations, the default would be to reach out to the commission.
You raised a very good question that we always being asked at every presentation. You don't have to prove it, because, sorry, we are there to take your complaint, and Daniela said it well, investigate, prove it. So don't you ever feel that, oh, how can I prove this thing? Why she or he denied me the employment? And you were very well put it. If you perceive, in fact, the fact that you're asking substantiate actually your perception, it's a good evidence for your perception. So don't worry about who proves what, because the commission is there to prove, investigate these things, and make a conclusion.
That's great. Yeah, like since we are winding down, any last thoughts, suggestions, overall advice, or things you would hope that the youth watching this will take away?
I think my last parting thought would be, if I can just button up on what a successful interview may, ultimately look like, is to, one, when you're in an interview, whether it's with one person or two person, to try and gauge the tone of the interview. Two, after the interview, you send a thank you letter. Three, before the interview, do the research, like check out the website, mission, or anything like that. If the website looks tightened up, maybe the culture is tightened up. So see if they're in the news. If they were in the news, what were they in the news for? And just be prepared with questions. And the last part I would ultimately say is, again, use the commission if you feel, if sometimes if there's smoke there, there's probably, you know, fire. Look what the application looks like. If they're asking you about salary, and they can ask you what would you like to make, but I know this is summer youth employment, this is a little bit different, but they shouldn't ask you for your history or anything like that. They can't make you tell if you have a disability. It's voluntary if that's on an application or anything like that. And let's just say you get the job, and then on day one, you say, hey, like, I'm gonna need, you know, a standing desk. And they say, oh, we can't afford that, so you can't work here. That is not a reasonable accommodation, AKA firing. So there's just all these things. It's just to keep in mind, if something doesn't feel right, then chances are it isn't right. And just reach out to the commission just to make sure that your gut feeling is probably right or wrong.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Sam. As far as addressing that, you know, if there is ever within, you know, employment basis, if you feel like there's something wrong, just don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always available through email and phone calls, and through, you know, your leaders at like Rashida and Stacy. They can always get in contact with us. And then just as a lasting thought, you know, I just want to thank Rashida for allowing this space for us to come here and talk to all of you. I think it's always important for youth to know, even if it doesn't apply to them just yet, what laws and protections are out there, and, you know, just to be aware of what's there, and that you are protected under the law, under various circumstances, and that you can utilize services like ours in order to feel comfortable when applying for a job, and to know that just we're there for the community in general.
Just wanted to add very briefly on what Danielle was saying. In addition to knowing the law, it's summer youth employment program. It's supposed to be about earning some money, but also having some fun, right? It's summer, you deserve it. So ask your potential employer, what kind of program did they design for you? I mean, are you going to have field trips? Are you going to be exposed to different things? Are you going to be sitting behind a desk, you know, all summer long? I think it should be, you know, there should be some fun components there, field trips, maybe some exposure. I'm not sure how it works in the time of COVID, how it's going to work, you know, because I'm sure a lot of these things will be remote. But again, there should be some element of, you know, summer and having some fun with it, okay? So hope you enjoy your summer employment experience. All the best.
Luckily, we're not like Goldman and Sachs, so they can only do 25 hours a week if they're 16 and older. So they still have some time to have a good work-life balance. But I will thank everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time to come. This is super beneficial, just hearing it. I learn a lot every time I sit in one of these, and I know when the youth hear it, it's definitely a need. So thank you all for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. We appreciate you.
Yeah, I'd just like
Thank
to
you for
echo
having.
Rashida's thanks. Thank you to all of you, Daniela, Alex, Ayala from the Commission on Human Rights, and Sam as well for coming. And of course, Cassandra, thank you for taking the time, asking some great questions. Thank you for answering all of our questions. This has really been really informative, even for me.